Welcome to the Hunger Garden at the Pennsylvania State Capitol. This is, I believe, the 5th year that the Hunger Garden has been in existence, and it's a project of the Legislative Hunger Caucus, which is something bipartisan that happens at our legislature with some significant leaders on the House and Senate side who are part of it. To me, it serves several purposes. One is it's a reminder. Legislators and staff pass by. Since I work in the garden every couple weeks and do a little volunteer time, it's a great chance to talk to people about the hunger realities that are around us, and that perhaps that can be remembered when votes are taken. I actually think it's really helped to create better relationships with the hunger advocacy community and the legislature and staff, simply because there's been this constant presence here. Also, since we work on wider issues and around employment, jobs, funding for daycare, benefits, to be able to tie, how taking this vote would impact hunger in your community. It gives us some people that we know already have that interest. I'm from Philadelphia, but becoming acquainted with the breadth and diversity of Pennsylvania, the kinds of congregations we have, and that almost every single one has a hunger ministry of some kind, and that becomes the first entry point. So I find people already are aware. They may not know, the numbers and the stats, but they see people coming. And in just about every congregation I go into, there's someone there in the congregation who shares how they've had to access the congregation's food. So it's not a them, it's an us. And I think that's something that we need to talk about and acknowledge. How many people in our own pews are struggling, as well as we serve our neighbors. I find exploring with congregations why people are hungry and why programs that are going to serve the needy, which often take up so much time and energy, simply to get those canned goods onto the shelves and then out to the people who need them, that can exhaust a group of volunteers, especially as the needs get bigger. I try to do education that will teach, how this work can be supported, what the state part of this funding is, and therefore why it's important to be advocating on the state food purchase program or other line items in the budget that are going to fund what we're doing in congregations. But then also, what's the bigger picture? One of the main drivers of poverty in Pennsylvania is the high cost of housing. And that's in urban, rural, and suburban areas. And so showing, the average housing numbers, what that means for someone who's, when you've got two folks on minimum wage, you actually need 2.3 jobs to be able to, afford a third of your salary to go towards your apartment rent in order to make everything else balance. So that piece of education often leads people, and what we're doing follow-up with youth who've been to Detroit around the State Housing Trust Fund and blight, and say, if you worked on lots there, we have a resource sheet where they can do research in their own areas. Why are properties blighted? What can we do about it? Who's working on it? And what does advocacy have to do with it? In the wake of Freddie Gray, Charleston, the long litany of these events, we've had numerous calls to our office or contacts around anti-racism resources. And so we've actually developed a page now simply where people can have a go-to place that we're continuing to add to. We have been in contact with synods that have any kind of anti-racism work or teams to say, how can we help build on that in terms of public policy work. There's a racial profiling bill that the ACLU and the YWCA have been doing some work on, and we've been in contact with them, and we'll be supporting it and eventually bringing it to our network as time goes on. Another place where we've plugged in is growing interest in our congregations across the state on mass incarceration issues, seeing that's a real concrete way, after reading The New Jim Crow, people are saying, well, what do we do here? And so we've been working specifically with some synod teams who may do prison ministries to say, let's build upon this for some justice work, especially around youth sentencing, life sentencing for youth. A third area where I have a lot of interest is in getting what's called, there's states that have racial impact statements that must be written that analysis made around any new bill. What's going to be the impact on different racial groups in the Commonwealth? I think that's a longer-term thing that I want us to look at, and again, that's how public policy can be contributing to that. We also are, we have a policy council nominated by each synod, as well as the social ministry organizations, one seminary rep currently from Philadelphia, Dr. John Hoffmeyer. And this year or next year, we are encouraging them to attend the White Privilege Conference, which will be taking place in 2016 in Philadelphia. And I think that's a great opportunity, as we say, how do we, in our public policy work, remain accountable to communities of color in the state? I think that will be a tool that can help us grapple with that. We've been talking about the role of confession and repentance as part of our public life, communal lament, and that advocacy sometimes is very divorced from that. It's about here's this action, let's take it. Here's this policy we want to institute or fix. But I think we can go deeper than that as people of faith because it's already there in our theology. And how do we recognize our own participation in whatever it is we're trying to change and our own blocks? Sometimes it's our own comfort. Whenever I talk to Lutherans about taxation, you get a whole range of opinion. But what does it really mean to work then for the common good? Those are tough questions. As I go into congregations and conduct advocacy trainings, what I find out that there's a foundation that's needed before we actually get to issues, which is faithful communal discernment, which there are resources for, but I think many of our rostered leaders either don't have the time or to actually invite potential controversy or disagreement when there's already so many other fires to put out. I know may not be what everyone's jumping into doing, but I find that the congregations that do that, that can faithfully chew together on an issue, what does God will for us to do in this, and sometimes find, here's what we can agree on. You may not be able to agree on everything, but here's what we can agree on. Some issues like payday lending was very interesting and both very liberal and very conservative. Politically, corners of the state, we had people who wanted to work on it because it was absolutely so clear. But other issues are not that clear, and I would rather a congregation really take the time to chew on it and work on it and maybe say, here's the minimum that we can do, and do together in the name of Christ. To me, that becomes a witness to society of what it is to be church together. As Lutherans, we hold that the whole world belongs to God and that our political lives and realm is not divorced or different from what we do in church, and that we're called to care for the society around us. I often thank our legislators and tell them about our Lutheran theology because we're not trying to either baptize government or extricate ourselves from it. We see it as an avenue through which God restrains evil and promotes the good, and that we're called to participate in it. So I find if someone's looking for something to do, finding ways to say thank you is awfully important because our public servants do work very hard. There are days when it's easy to be cynical, when there is corruption, when there are things, but I find many are called to this work out of a sense of the greater common good, and the more we can support that, the better. I also, just about every congregation I go to, there's someone who says we can't mix religion with politics. I think we have some reframing and relearning to do, of what it does mean though to participate, in the church, which is in the world, and that there's no division between them.